want to turn here to another very important issue, and that is the right to choose. And we are very happy to be joined here by Jessica Mason Pieklo, who is a senior vice president and executive editor at Rewire. Jessica, thank you so much for being back with us.
Pleasure.
Oh, no. Oh, there we go.
Oh, we thought you were muted, but we got you at the end. You're not muted. You're live.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Ali. Said thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
No, the pleasure is all ours. The last time we had you here, we were talking mainly about Texas. Still certainly an important issue. I know the Supreme Court now is addressing cases regarding Mississippi and Texas. So maybe just to help folks understand who maybe are just seeing things in the news, what exactly is the Supreme Court taking up regarding those two states, and what are the implications?
Sure. So this Monday, the Supreme Court actually heard arguments on the Texas abortion ban that we talked about last time I was here. And for your audience members who might not be familiar about it, that is a ban that is really unique. It's the most extreme anti-abortion law in effect in the country right now. And it does two things. It attempts to ban abortion as soon as there's cardiac fetal activity detected, so a quote unquote fetal heartbeat. And that can happen as soon as 6 weeks in pregnancy. But what's really dangerous and unique, and what the Supreme Court was hearing arguments about this bill on Monday, is a private enforcement mechanism. And this is a portion of the law that outsources to private individuals who don't even have to live in Texas, by the way. They could live in Arkansas, they could live in Oklahoma, they could live here in Colorado if they wanted to. What they do is file lawsuits if they believe somebody is violating this ban. And not just if they're performing an abortion at 6 weeks or beyond, but if they are aiding or abetting somebody getting an abortion. So that's abortion funds, driving somebody to their appointment. This law has been in effect since September 1st, and it's creating a humanitarian crisis in Texas. There's just no other way to say it.
I mean, wow. I know but every time you hear it, you just think like, how is this real life? Go ahead, Rania.
I'm curious, you mentioned it's creating a humanitarian crisis. Can you actually elaborate on that a little bit? Because I don't think people realize, they think it's just Texas, I'm not there. So
Sure.
One, what does that mean? And two, why should people who aren't in Texas be concerned about it?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity, because this is so important. And one of the things in Monday's arguments at the Supreme Court that was very frustrating is the human impact of SB 8, this law, was barely talked about at all. So what this law has done is effectively banned abortion in the state of Texas. It has made it impossible to get an abortion beyond 6 weeks of pregnancy. So that's extremely early on. If you are so lucky to find out you're pregnant early enough to be able to schedule the time off and get an appointment, then you can access care. So what folks are saying on the ground in Texas is that as much as 90 to 95% of abortion care has ground to a halt there. Abortion funds are saying that 75% of the people who they are helping fund procedures are traveling out of state. In my state of Colorado, where I live, our clinics have seen an uptick of over 500% in terms of patient care and needs. So people are traveling far. And this isn't just abortion care that it's impacting. The Washington Post had a story that they ran about a patient who had an ectopic pregnancy and had to drive to New Mexico because the hospital was uncertain if it could proceed. It's not, and this is a procedure that's not covered under SB 8. But the fear of the law, the fear of a lawsuit and $10,000 of mounting liability has frozen reproductive care. So that's just a slice. That is just a segment of what folks are looking at. We know that patients are traveling as far as Alabama, to go get care. So it is really dire. And then you have places like Oklahoma that have a series of laws that were set to take effect on November 1st, but are currently blocked by a court. If those were to happen, right, if those laws and restrictions were to take effect, that further pressures the pipeline. So this is really, I don't use humanitarian crisis lightly. Folks need to understand that people are unable to get basic reproductive health care, and that the places where care is supposed to be protected are beyond capacity.
That's just wild. An ectopic pregnancy, and then that's a pretty urgent issue. They were sent basically away.
14 hours,
Jeez.
14 hours. And these are time sensitive issues, you know? And then Eugene, you asked me about the Mississippi case. You know, in less than a month on December 1st, the Supreme Court is going to consider a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. So while it's considering this Texas law, while this Texas law remains on the books, it's also going to hear a case where the lawyers will argue that now is the time to recriminalize abortion.
I mean, one of the things, I almost hesitate to even bring this up, but people have been telling me about it, that Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Barrett are good now, I guess, and are going to save us on both of these issues. I didn't believe it, but you are the expert. Should we be expecting them to put on their capes and save the day here?
Yeah, I'm so glad you gave me the opportunity to address this. In Monday's argument, both Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Barrett sounded extremely skeptical of this enforcement mechanism that I was just describing in the Texas law, the one that allows just anybody, you know, sort of any random person to go file a lawsuit. That they were skeptical of that. So they could very well block that. Do I think that then they would turn around in the Mississippi case and also block the Mississippi law, or that they wouldn't, if given an opportunity, actually overturn Roe versus Wade? No, I don't. What the Supreme Court was considering on Monday was a procedural issue, a very important one, but it also gives them an opportunity for some cover. You know, we don't. It's sort of gauche to talk about the court as a political institution, but it is. And we know that the justices pay attention to this stuff. So if they are looking to sort of dial down the temperature when there are conversations around things like court expansion, for example, casting a vote to look moderate in Texas and then have folks kind of forget about it by the time Mississippi happens is certainly one pathway that they could take.
It feels that a lot of the strategies here from these states is just, we're going to just come up with whatever we can come up with and send as many things into the courts as possible. And, just basically hope that eventually they hit the right formula to eliminate Roe v. Wade. It feels strategic in that sense.
It's absolutely strategic. The Mississippi case that the court will hear in just a couple of weeks is an excellent example of this. The law that's at issue is a piece of model legislation, and the think tank that effectively came up with it had a meeting and said, where should we shop this to first? And among the states on the table were Arkansas and Mississippi. Where did they go? They went to Mississippi. They approached a couple other states too, and other states passed those copycat laws. But they went to Mississippi first. And one of the reasons why they went to Mississippi first is because it was heavily gerrymandered. They knew the lawmakers wouldn't ask any funny questions about what's actually in the bill. They knew there was a friendly attorney general who would vigorously defend it when it was challenged. There's only one clinic in the state. So it really has the ability to absolutely create a vice grip on a state where access is already limited. So it was really, truly a perfect storm of political opportunity for them. And they took it and they went all the way to the Supreme Court with it. And they said they were going to do that. Kay Ivey was having press conferences that says, we know this law is unconstitutional. We hope it goes to the Supreme Court because we want this to be the vehicle that overturns Roe versus Wade.
Wow. It really is, the level of cynicism behind it, says so much here. And I'm glad you brought up this issue of the court being a political institution, because it feels like that's the other sort of shoe that's dropping here is, if you say court packing, then people say, oh, you're going against the traditions of America and all these other pieces. But it does seem like those who want to just eliminate abortion in this country, and of course, many other things that they want to do that are terrible, they're willing to use the courts as being highly political. So, I wonder just how you feel about that question, because I know it's one of these, sort of hot button issues when it comes to the courts. Well, not amongst the right, but amongst, sadly, many progressives.
Yeah, it blows my mind that it truly is, because one, we have apolitical evidence for expanding the Supreme Court at a minimum. We used to have as many Supreme Court justices as we had at federal appellate circuits. We have 13 appellate circuits now. We should have 13 Supreme Court justices. That's not like a political thing at all, right? But the idea that this is somehow again, playing politics in a dirty fashion, and that's what Democrats and progressives don't do, is just, I mean, it's ludicrous. We'll lose every battle if that's the case. Mitch McConnell very successfully captured the federal courts for a lifetime. And that wasn't just under the Trump administration. This was a mission of his for 20 years. You know, anytime they had an opportunity to stymie Democratic appointees, they did. Anytime they had an opportunity to jam through Republican nominees, they did. And Democrats were like, geez, we're just trying to play nice here. And I mean, as a result now, Trump was able to appoint 1 in 4 federal circuit appellee judges. So 1 in 4 judges on the federal courts of appeals is a Trump appointee. Those folks have said that they don't know if Brown versus Board of Education was rightly decided. They are opposed to Roe versus Wade. I mean, so what do progressives and Democrats hope to accomplish in a policy agenda with these folks deciding the outcome?
You know, when we look at the issue of, you know, the courts and how we move forward, where does this leave the issue of legislation? I mean, I know a lot of people have been saying for many years that Roe v. Wade should be codified in law, but it does seem like the more of these negative decisions we at least potentially get, that could constrain what a law could do. I mean, how do those two things work together? How should they?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Absolutely, we need some sort of federal codification of abortion rights, whether it's the Women's Health Protection Act or something that goes beyond that. I mean, it is a no-brainer at this point. We've seen states that are so heavily gerrymandered just use this for political opportunity. So without a doubt. And we know that in terms of constitutional law, this is how their give and take works. If the Supreme Court rolls things back, Congress can answer. Congress absolutely can answer. Now, will Congress answer? That's a different question. That's a question of political will and, you know, the apparatus standing in the way. Can we get a codification of Roe so long as the filibuster exists? I don't believe so. You know, I mean, I think that that's a very real conversation that Democrats and progressives have to be prepared to have.
You know, it's interesting because it feels like this issue of abortion and, you know, pro-life, pro-choice, like 10 years ago played a bigger role in the culture war nationally than it does now. Like, I don't see Republicans on the national level really running on the issue of abortion, not like they used to, where it was like center stage. And I know that, you know, the way the public feels about stuff doesn't necessarily reflect how it's going to play out politically or in Congress. But is that at least a positive sign? The fact that as far as the culture war goes, the public is like on a different page on a national scale than Republicans are?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it also shows and speaks to the real danger and failure within the pro-choice movement from relying on the courts over the 20 years. You know, public opinion is absolutely on the side of keeping abortion legal. Folks know the dangers of what happens when people cannot access reproductive health care that they need. And so with Roe legal now for almost 50 years, folks pretty much know somebody, whether they realize it or not, who's had an abortion. There are folks whose lives are benefited every day by this. And I think the abortion storyteller movement has really done a lot of good here in moving that needle. Not necessarily, I can't say if they've changed public opinion, but they've changed the public conversation so that even you're hearing things like safe, legal, and rare. That's no longer even in the conversation now. People understand that that is a stigmatizing way to talk about abortion, that abortion is healthcare. And when people need healthcare, they need to be able to access it when they need it.
And I guess, like, where are we headed now with this legal battle? What comes next?
That's a great question. So, I mean, we wait to see what the court is going to do in Texas. And with this case, they could rule very quickly. We could get a decision as early as this week still. You know, we could get something very soon given the procedural posture of how the case got to the court. And then I mentioned the Mississippi case. By the end of the summer, we could know if abortion remains legal in this country or not. There are over 26 states that would instantly criminalize abortion should Roe versus Wade be overturned. So the landscape could look very different in July than it does now. And I will say that it probably will. I don't know that the court will go that far in Dobbs. I think what happens next is that we will get a series of decisions that allows more and more extreme abortion bans to stay on the books. I do think ultimately we will get a decision that overturns Roe versus Wade, in part because the anti-choice movement won't be satisfied until they do, no matter what they say on a national stage. Like, that's really truly what they're going for. And they have the votes on the Supreme Court to get it.
Mm, mm. Wow. I mean, it really is a dire circumstance on so many fronts. And I mean, it just feels that on so many levels, they've already done so much damage, Jessica. I mean, there's only one place in Mississippi, as you mentioned. Texas, everybody's in a holding pattern. I'm assuming probably it's not that much better in Alabama and some of these other states. I mean, it feels that even without getting a total ban, I mean, they really have done quite a bit of damage on this front.
They absolutely have. And I think it's important to, make connections to the fact that they're not doing anything to advance maternal health outcomes on the other side, too. This is not a war on, rights. It's a war on bodies. It's a war on people, ultimately. And we talk about it in a rights context, but these are actual human people that are involved, These are their lives. And so we need to be holding the anti-choice movement accountable on that end.
Well, as always, Jessica, really appreciate you coming on, helping us sort through all of this. And as always, it's our pleasure to have you here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me back.